ready to next week.
You're live, Madam Chair.
Okay, welcome, folks. This is House Corrections and Institutions Committee. It is May 5th, Friday. It's our 1 o'clock meeting, and we're going to spend some time with the Department of Corrections, and it's on 2 items. The Commissioner of Corrections has wanted to come in and speak to us about the health of our folks who are incarcerated, both situations of folks coming in as detainees and also those folks who are serving a sentence, and what they're starting to encounter in the Department of Corrections. And we need to remember that the folks who are incarcerated, either detainees or those with a sentence, are under state custody, under the custody of the state. And we have a responsibility there. And also we're going to talk about the Department of Corrections. Is it on? It's not muted. Okay. The Department of Corrections, the training at the academy, and talking about the recruitment and training of correctional officers. I know the commissioner has to leave by 1:45. So we can start with the commissioner, and I also have to be somewhere at the environmental committee at 2 o'clock to present the amendment we worked on last week on the transfer of money from the EPA revolving loan fund, the Clean Water and Drinking Water revolving loan fund. We want a quick summary of the amendment that we have proposed to I never can remember. 80. Thank you. I can never remember. It was 80 or 89. So with that, I'll ask the Commissioner of Corrections to come on up and welcome. And did you have, I haven't even checked our webpage. Do we have any documents? No documents.
No documents.
Okay. Great. Welcome, Commissioner.
Thank you.
You're in the hot seat again.
Good. Yeah. I feel like I should have a little plaque with my name on it on the chair.
Target, right?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nick Demo. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Corrections. Thank you for inviting us to testify today on this topic and on the training and recruitment retention work that we're doing. I think I'm excited that you'll get to hear from Jim Rice in a little bit on those topics as well. I had asked the chair a little earlier in the session for some time to come in and speak about the health of the incarcerated population in the state. And I think this is as good a time as any as we struggle with many of these issues in our system. I was hoping to have our medical director and our head of health services here today, but they are unfortunately unavailable. So you're stuck, unfortunately, with just me, but I'll do my level best to convey their sentiments as well. I think that I'll just start with the key takeaway that I want to highlight for you, and that is our incarcerated population is getting rapidly older and rapidly more sick. And I think we probably could trend that before the pandemic and show an increase over time. Since the pandemic, though, it has become a staggering change in those trend lines. And I think some of that is because of COVID itself, but not a lot of it. I mean, I think what COVID highlighted for us is it revealed illnesses, it revealed the sickness of the population in new ways and really hypercharged that. The other thing that I think this committee knows well is that ultimately the correction system, much like the healthcare system, is the receiver of the most vulnerable in our society. And so they're the most vulnerable to illness as well, and often have lived very difficult lifestyles that contribute to that. In many cases, the folks that we're serving, particularly detainees who are just getting after they've been charged with a crime, have not had steady or routine access to medical care, are not taking advantage of preventative healthcare measures. And so when they do get to us, the correction system actually becomes the first stable access to persistent healthcare that they have. And that's a troubling reality. I also think it highlights, though, that the Department of Corrections is ultimately it is the largest department in the Agency of Human Services, but one of the largest providers of human services in the state for the most vulnerable population. And there are certainly areas for improvement. I won't discount that at all. But I think it's something that we're answering this need for a really vulnerable population. So let me give you some concrete information about that. So as you know, today in Vermont, we have just over 1,300 incarcerated individuals. Of those 1,300, 1,000 of them have chronic illnesses. 1,000 of 1,300. Of them, 90% of our total population is on some prescription medication. The average number of prescriptions that an individual incarcerated in Vermont is on are 5.5 separate medications. 70% are on psychotropic medications. About 60% are on medically assisted treatment for opioid use disorder. Not even other addiction problems, but specifically opioid use disorder. And I was saying at the beginning that the trends are changing. We had a 47% increase since 2015 in that chronic illness number. We are taking people to the hospital nearly every day. We've had to this morning, yesterday, we did emergency room transports. We had 300.
Since when?
Sorry?
Since when?
Which piece?
2015, I think.
The chronic illness change, yeah, since 2015.
Could you, I know you just threw out that data, could you kind of send that data?
Yep,
to Phil?
certainly.
Yeah, that-
Those are important numbers to have.
I'll tell you, last year we took individuals to the emergency room 354 times. So that's nearly one emergency room trip a day, every day of the year.
So is that coming from all 6 facilities, or is the bulk of that coming from one facility over another?
So that data captures all facilities. It would be disproportionate. I think Springfield certainly delivers folks to the emergency room more often than other facilities, but we do have emergency room transports from every facility in the state.
So why would you have more transports from the Springfield facility? The reason I'm asking
Yep.
this, it's not because I'm from Springfield. I want that to be
So
clear.
you are.
But but that's not the reason. The concern has been, and I'm gonna jump to it, the concern has been, there's been so many deaths down there this year. And then hearing that a lot of those transports, hospital transports of the 300 plus a year are coming from one particular facility. Is there a particular reason? Because I think people could jump to conclusions, something's going on in the facility.
Right.
That's the conclusion that people can jump to. And I think we really need to understand what the population is within that facility, or what else is happening. Why is that facility where the deaths are occurring and it has the highest transport of folks to the hospital?
So the first data point I would show you is Springfield and Newport are our 2 largest facilities. So just as a general matter, they have the most of our population. But Springfield in particular is designed to handle our geriatric population. In the prison system in the United States, we consider folks 55 and older geriatric. And so they have the oldest population in the state. It is also designed to handle our most complex medical needs. It has the largest infirmary in the state. When it was built, it was purpose built to be the high-end medical facility. And it has a preponderance of our high-end mental health needs individuals. And so as a general matter, the folks who are the oldest, the sickest, or have specialty care needs are housed at Springfield. And so you've seen that we have had deaths in this last year and in 2022 as well. A vast majority of those were natural causes deaths, and most of them were at Springfield. And that's because it's housing the populations who are the most vulnerable to those adverse outcomes.
So I interrupted your presentation, but I really want folks to know what's happening within all of our facilities, because they're all designed differently and they're holding different populations of our incarcerated population. And I think that's an important piece that needs to, folks need to understand.
So I'll just give you a couple other pieces of data, and we will package this up and send it to you so you have it and you don't have to rely simply on the notes. In 2022, the number of encounters with medical, so when an incarcerated individual needs to see medical, those encounters went up 27%. just from 2021 to 2022. And the number of requests to see medical went up 20% in that same time frame. So we're seeing a population that is requesting healthcare more, that is accessing healthcare more, and then also is presenting with needs that even go beyond the scope of what we can provide. So those are those emergency room visits that are out into the local hospitals. It's the hospital level of care, which we don't provide in our system. We rely on our community health systems to do that. In every category, these numbers are skyrocketing. And that's really troubling. I also think in some ways, it's an early warning signal for the state, because we are talking about a highly vulnerable population, and it's a concentrated population. So we get to see trends quicker than the general population sees them. But I think, as my colleague at the Department of Health would tell you, across the board, we're seeing the sickness of society increasing in many categories, particularly following the COVID-19 pandemic.
You have a question here?
So along those lines, in terms of people that are in there, are the ones coming in as sick? Well, see, what I'm trying to get at is it just that we have a population that's been in there quite a while and they're aging to the point where they're having maladies that are causing issues, or is the population actually entering, getting sicker?
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Great question. So we're seeing two kind of concurrent trends. One, the population is getting older, and those folks, many of the folks who are aging in our system have been with our system for a long time. And we know that life before prison was challenging, but also life in prison is challenging. They're hard environments. They're not therapeutic. The floors are hard. It's loud. We've talked a lot about that this year. So like the state as a whole, the prison population is getting older. Vermont, Maine, we're some of the oldest states in the country, and our prison populations follow the aging trend lines of the state. So that population is getting sick and having those, often lifelong illnesses that cause natural death. Simultaneously, we bring in the detainers, the folks who are charged but not sentenced, and they are presenting much sicker than they have in the past. And so we're seeing in both of those categories, folks are having adverse impacts that are really causing us concern.
And of course, it seems as if the drug arrests that are going on in the state have been increasing substantially. And as those folks go in, are they contributing to, just because of their lifestyles, is that contributing, you think, also beyond the normal aging that would occur in Vermont's population?
Well, it's well known that persistent long-term drug use does add, particularly to cardio and respiratory issues, and that's a body of what we're seeing as the causes of death in individuals that we're caring for. As I mentioned, we have 60% of our population as a medically assisted treatment just for opioids. I think we can deduce that there are other substances that folks were using in the communities as well that there aren't the same medical assisted treatments for. But I think it's fair to conclude that substance use is a contributing factor, certainly to the chronic illnesses that folks are suffering.
So we have a lot more questions.
Sure.
Okay, so we have Mary, Chip, and Connor.
No, it was John.
Oh, okay, I can see John.
She was passing along the hand.
I didn't think, I didn't think you could see him, that's why I went.
I hope she can see me. Earlier in your presentation, you gave statistics on the number of people coming in that were on prescription drugs. Do you have the numbers of when, were they on prescriptions when they came, or are we prescribing them? And that may be exacerbating the health issues, the fact that they weren't being treated.
I don't have statistics to say how many people came in with those specific prescriptions. The data that I presented to you and will share with you is individuals in our system who we are providing prescription medication for. Yeah. And I can't, without having the relevant medical background, can't tell you whether the prescription drug use is a contributing factor, but simply,
or the lack of prescription,
or the preceding lack of prescription as well.
Chip and then Connor.
So Commissioner, have you ever done, has there been a cost benefit analysis to possibly open a hospital level infirmary in one of the units? Considering how many staff it takes to transport someone to the emergency room every day and various other things. And also, I'm wondering if you get Medicaid prescription discount for the medication that you're administering.
Yeah, let me take your questions in
Yeah.
reverse because I have a very
Okay,
clean
cool.
answer to one and a less clean answer to the
All
other.
right. Fair enough.
There is a federal exclusion to Medicaid for incarcerated individuals and correction systems in the United States. That's a federal law that excludes people who are incarcerated from accessing Medicaid. There is an
Oh, that's right. I
effort
thought it was-
afoot at the federal level to address that.
Mhm.
The state of California was the first state that was given a waiver to the Medicaid law that would enable individuals to access Medicaid while they're incarcerated. That just happened a few months ago. And Vermont was on the front end of that and submitted a waiver request in 2021, I believe. Yes. And are still waiting for word from the federal government, but that has evolved fairly quickly. I think my best guess is the federal government is using California as a test case to see if it can implement that type of program. But the state itself can do little to force the federal government to enable.
There are pharmacy companies that I know some designated agencies have now taken to open pharmacies within their borders or within their buildings, and they are procuring a medication at a discount rate. Has that ever been?
Unfortunately, this is something we're very interested in, and we would love for the federal government to give us access to those discounted prices. That is something that has not been permitted under federal law for corrections agencies.
Really?
And this becomes the most acute in our system when we talk about MAT, because we buy MAT medication that's used in the facilities. The MAT medication that Medicaid funds on the outside is different. But if we were to try to switch to the Medicaid funded prescription that's used on the outside, it would increase the cost to the state of Vermont by millions of dollars a year. But we can't, and it's because there's disparity in the pricing schemes between what Medicaid will pay for and what the state can afford. So that's an area that we've pushed the federal government. We hope that we get there with them in the next couple of years through these waiver processes. So unfortunately, no. Individuals that are incarcerated are not eligible for Medicaid. They become eligible if they meet the criteria
Right, I was
as
a
soon
little
as they
confused
leave.
on that backwards, yes.
But,
I understand that now.
So then to your other question, you'd asked if we had considered building out a hospital level of care within our correction system. This has been something that Vermont has struggled with for many, many years. I think in general, there would be an interest in, increasing that type of service in the state. Unfortunately, because of our size, it's nearly impossible to create an economy of scale where we can afford that. And so the state at various times has looked to public options for, could we bring in a health system, a state located health system to cover the correctional facilities? And the answer is no. We've looked at, could we bring it in-house as a service? We'd basically become a hospital. And the answer is no. And so it leaves the state of Vermont with exceedingly few options as to how we provide healthcare to individuals who are incarcerated. We put it out for a competitive bid process, and we get a few bidders each time. And unfortunately, because the market is fairly limited, because Vermont's so small, we end up selecting the one that we think is best, but we don't have a lot of options to choose from.
It's really a shame. Really, plays hell on your budget.
It does.
It's our budget.
It
It's
does.
a
Right.
state budget.
Okay.
It's the general fund budget.
Okay.
And that's especially true right now because healthcare costs are skyrocketing, as you know, not just for corrections, but across the board. And we're feeling that same exact pain. And you highlighted just one other piece in your question that it is also a huge burden on staff
Yeah.
and on our local hospitals. So, we are routinely taking people, I highlighted the statistic about emergency room visits, emergency department visits, but we also take people for hospital level of care where they stay for weeks and weeks on end. And our staff have to sit with them that whole
And
time.
have to staff that room.
Yep. We have to staff the transport, we have to staff the room. And because our facilities are struggling with staffing, much of that has fallen to our field, who are taking those responsibilities on, even though it's
That's right.
not been historically ascribed to them. And so you can see the cascading pressures that this impacts the system.
Welcome to the world of corrections. There's always
There's always something.
barriers put in place. Connor and then Michelle.
Thanks, Commissioner. I always felt like prison would be a place, you have a lot of downtime. You could either get like in pretty good shape with that downtime or really bad shape too, if you're very sedentary. So I'm wondering like what opportunities are there? Like if you don't mind just giving a big overview for like recreation, exercise, facilities like that. And maybe like just if you could talk a bit about the diet,
Yeah.
as well.
So every facility has recreation yard. Many of the facilities have a gymnasium. There's fitness equipment that's available. And so it varies depending on the unit and depending on the facility, but folks just get access to recreation time, and we're looking to expand that. I will flag Vermont, and you've heard me say this before, Vermont was the only state in the country to not lose anybody to COVID-19, either an incarcerated individual or a staff member. However, that did come at a cost, and we were very good at mitigating the virus, thank goodness. And I think preserving life was needed to and was the top priority. But that meant that individuals in our system were in lockdown for long periods of time. We limited access to recreation because, particularly during the early phases of the virus, we didn't know whether folks could commingle safely, and recreation is a commingled activity. Often we have multiple units that recreate at the same time. And so, we first saw the impacts of that in the mental health. We were starting to see folks were really struggling with mental health issues because of the lockdowns, because of the lack of socialization, but because of the lack of recreation. Now I think we're also seeing that as part of the physical illnesses, the physical condition of individuals. And that is also true, I will flag, in the general population of the state. Folks, there are reverberations from the way we handled COVID that we feel across the state. So we are seeking ways to get folks more recreation time so that they can, choose to get healthier or fitter, and hopefully that will help mitigate any of these chronic or longer term illnesses. But that is a huge concern of ours. On the dietary side, we sat down and designed those. We have a food vendor who came in, but we sat down, we studied some of the other systems in the state. Maine has a very good culinary program that they use, and sat down with dietitians from the Vermont Department of Health, I believe from the university, and then helped to design our food service with healthy options in mind. Now that is limited. I mean, I'm not saying it's a perfectly healthy diet, and I think there's a lot of room for growth. And it's something that we've been talking to the Department of Agriculture a lot about. Before the pandemic, we had explored different agriculture programs that we could bring healthy foods, locally sourced food into the facilities. That exists in pockets, but I think if we could get to a more ubiquitous offering of that, I'll give you one example. All the milk at CRCF is fresh Vermont milk from Vermont cows, Vermont farms, brought to the facility. It's all fresh. We're interested in exploring how we get that system right, things like that, which I think would contribute to the health issues as well.
Great, thanks.
Michelle?
Yeah, so my question is actually along the same lines as what Connor was asking. I was thinking when you mentioned that most of the natural causes are heart related. Do you happen to know, are those people that are dying from arteriosclerosis because they have clogged arteries, or are they people who, have a drug or alcohol history that made them have an enlarged heart? And then, do you have a sense from the natural deaths? Are the deaths that are related to heart problems also related to things that perhaps a wellness program could could impact?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think it's worth remembering that while we have had far more deaths than we would want in our system, the sample size that we're dealing with is still quite small. We're talking in the single digits to low double digits. And so extrapolating from that, I think, is a bit dangerous for us to do. We do have the medical examiner's findings on a number of those cases that we can also share. At least the autopsy or the death certificates are public record, and they label the cause of death, so we could share that. I suspect that it's a combination of things, but not being a medical expert, I'm hesitant to go much further down that road. But to the last part of your question, I would say any wellness program is a welcomed and healthy addition to our system, right? So even if folks have suffered from chronic, substance use over time, have many illnesses, a wellness program is still good. That's still a beneficial offering, even if it may not solve, for their physical system. It's still a good thing we should do. And I think we're exploring ways to expand recreation, do those types of things. But we'd be open to other ideas for ensuring that we're getting wellness resources into the facilities.
So follow up to that, could you just speak a tiny bit to where are things in terms of staffing? Because I know one of the things that I'm aware of from being in the committee and visiting some sites is that, everybody has a gym, and some of the gyms are filled with equipment and people can't actually use them for a long time. Or they have an outside space where you could go for a walk, but you don't have enough staff to take people outside. They have a space where you could have a garden, but they don't have staff to supervise the location of the garden. So I know staffing, from what I've heard, is getting better, because that is very intertwined with the issue of what kind of experiences are going to be possible for folks. And if we're trying to promote wellness and health, certainly diet and exercise are part of those. And the diet you can address regardless of staff issues. But the health part, in terms of being able to go outside and be active and do different kinds of physical things, those require another element. And it seems like sometimes those take the back seat. I've heard of certain things like, we have to offer religious programs, we have to offer risk reduction programs. But the things that might be more like yoga, for example, you might like yoga, but you don't always find that. So I guess could you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, so you're right. Staffing is improving. It's improving at a good pace. Certainly, we wish it was faster, we wish it was more, but we're running very large academies, much higher over average academy sizes. We're actually retaining our recent graduates at a much higher level than we had been in the past. So all those are good things. It's starting to give us more space to do the things we want to do, not just what we need to do. And so I think of it as basically rings. At your core, you have the things you absolutely must do. We must keep the facility secure so people don't escape, so people don't come in when they're not supposed to, et cetera. We have to keep individuals safe within the facilities. Then from there, we have to do the risk reduction programming. We have to provide certain requirements under law, et cetera. Then from there, we know this will be good for folks. How do we get to that? And the more staff that we have enables us to expand into those outer rings more and more. And so I think we're getting there. I was just in Springfield yesterday, actually, and got to walk around, and it seemed like staffing from where we were, particularly last summer, is flipped on its head. It's a totally different universe down there today, and they are expanding opportunities for recreation just outside time, not even constructed, facilitated time, but hey, you just go out and walk laps. And I know the chair spent a good deal of time in Springfield. That's a nice big rec yard. There's a lot of room to move around.
Forgot to mention that.
Right. We're saving a room in case. So those opportunities are increasing, but certainly that's an area we want to continue to grow into as we get a more stable staffing pattern.
So I have two questions, and I'm going to come back to the healthcare. So when there's a death in the facility, I think it would be important for the committee to know what is then put in place, the investigative arena put in place. The second question I have is, we contract out for our healthcare, our medical and mental health care. And I'd like to know what oversight the Department of Corrections has on that provider.
Sure.
Because that's a linkage. The provider, healthcare provider, is the one that has the direct access. for the person who's incarcerated and
Yeah.
answering those sick calls, sick slips. Something is happening in a living unit with the help of someone. They're the ones who come in. So I'd like to know what happens when there is a death within the facility, and then what oversight the department has with the contractor.
Yeah, so when an individual dies in one of our facilities, regardless of cause, that area that they died in is secured and sealed off. Vermont State Police are notified first, and they begin an independent criminal investigation into every death. They take over control of that scene, collect evidence, do as they need to, and then when they are finished, it is unsealed and handed back. It's cleaned and prepared, and we deal with it as we would otherwise. Second, the Defender General's office is notified. So you may be familiar that the Prisoner's Rights Office within the Defender General's office has a statutory investigation mandate. And so they have unfettered access to our 6 prisons in Vermont. They have investigators on their staff, and they conduct a wholly separate and independent investigation to include interviews with incarcerated individuals, with staff. They can review evidence, etc., and they generate a report. On our side, we do an operational administrative reviews. After action report, we look at all the camera footage, we interview our staff, we look at logbooks. If there's concerns or an allegation of misconduct as part of that process, it generates a separate investigation by the Department of Human Resources into the staff member. But our review is focused on operationally, what are we getting right? What are we getting wrong? Are there areas for improvement? Misconduct then is handed off to the Department of Human Resources for investigation. Separate from that, our health services contractor conducts an investigation into their staff and their processes to determine if any mistakes were made, areas for improvement. And because we want our own separate due diligence process, we contract with a separate independent medical entity that does a third-party review of the medical situation. So, was the proper medical care provided? Was it timely? Did they do as they were told? Was the equipment up to snuff? And the findings of the medical reports, the autopsy, everything is done by a separate independent medical entity, which we have no control over. We simply contract with them and they report back to us their findings and any recommendations for improvement. And those are actually usually very, very good. So it starts, when a death happens, it starts these processes in place. Each one functions largely independent of the other, and then each one results in an end product, with the exception perhaps of VSP, because that's a criminal process.
So while that investigation is going on from those separate entities, and they're all doing it separately at the same time, is any of that public? Can we have access to any of that, or is it at the end of the process?
So different pieces that are owned by different entities. Obviously, the state police don't reveal their findings until they've completed their investigation. The Defender General, I believe, also does not reveal their findings until it's completed. Operationally in DOC, we as policy don't reveal that while the investigation is underway. And I don't believe, though I don't want to speak for the medical contractor, that they do, or our independent medical review does either. Sorry, one other piece is the office of the medical examiner is the one that conducts the death review for the individual. And they do finalize a report via their autopsy findings. Those are also not public until the very end. And I'm not sure the autopsies are made public anyway, but death certificates are with the finding.
So I think that's important for committee members to know, because that process was put in place many, many years ago, about 20 years ago, because prior to that, there was no process in place when a death occurred in the facility.
I mean, I think it's something that Vermont actually should be very proud of, is it architected, and this is far before me, so I can take no credit for this. It architected an oversight framework that is extremely robust and comprehensive. And each phase of it, with the exception of the department's internal process, is independent. And so it provides you a comparable, reliable, repeatable product that is from trustworthy sources that are experts in their specific discipline. I think it was a really thoughtful way to go about designing that. And it's something the department, the state police, the defender general has followed for years now to pretty great effect. It instills trust in our system.
And I have that second, how do you oversee
Yeah.
your medical contractor?
Right. So in Vermont, health services are provided through a vendor under a comprehensive health services contract. I think of it sometimes as they're kind of the practitioners of the medical service, and then the department sits on top as an administration of that process. So within our health services team, we have 2 medical providers, a physician and a nurse, who oversee the actual practical medical care. We have contract monitors, data analysts. We have a mental health team that does both substance use and traditional mental health care. And they manage and oversee the provision of healthcare across the system. Then separate from that, I mentioned that we have a contract with an independent medical entity, and I always get the acronym wrong, but it's VPQHC. I think I got that right. Who does, anytime we have a question about medical care, want a consultation, they will review independently all the information and provide back their expert medical opinions. And I think that's an entity that's used statewide by other agencies and health entities as well. And so we have kind of checks and balances in place to make sure that the proper medical decisions are being made, that the proper processes are being followed. And this is one area where we find constant improvement. And I think, our health counterparts at the local hospital systems would say that's part of their process too, is in healthcare, there's opportunities for continuous improvement. And we see things that we could have done differently. And our hope is that we're continuously improving.
Tristan and Michelle.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah, good to see you.
So when there's a death or medical incident, correctional officers have to go from, often attempting to save a life with CPR measures, and then they've got to get back on duty, and they did their 16-hour shift.
Yeah.
That's got to be really hard. Can you talk about how the department supports your officers in these situations?
Yeah, I really appreciate you asking that. I'll just start by saying that I find that oftentimes when an incident happens in our system, the staff are pointed to as part of the problem. And I think that that's a really dangerous place to start. In fact, they are the first responder. They're the ones responding to these individuals and providing the necessary emergency care first. I mean, the medical staff are usually the second people to get there. The corrections officer is the first. And so all of our staff are trained in emergency medicine, first response medicine, and they are trained in the medical equipment. They can provide that kind of first stopgap emergency care until the medical staff can get there to provide care. But you're right. So it's, for folks who have spent time in the military or in law enforcement, firefighting, it's a very boring day until it's not. And then it's a very traumatic event followed by a really tough recovery period. And so our staff do provide that first level of care. They then support medical while they're providing a level of care. They facilitate the emergency transport. When numbers are called, a common phrase that we use, somebody calls on the radio that there's a medical event, staff come from all over to assist. It's a really impressive response that we have built into our system. But the individual then experiences that trauma and is in that event as much as anybody. And then we have support resources in place. Oftentimes we'll send the individual home or take them off of duty for that day and maybe for multiple days to recover from that. At any event, whether it's self-harm, natural causes, death, staff assault, whatever the case may be, we deploy our peer support team. It's something that this committee's heard a lot about this year because it has become such an integral part of our system and one of our best resources. They come right to the facility. Each facility has peer support members in it, but then they deploy a peer support team for multiple days at that facility to work with staff work through any of the trauma, the events that happen there. We also have clinical resources we make available to our staff, psychologists who are available to help work through that with staff. We can make referrals to outside clinical resources if that's necessary. And we'll permit people to take time off to recover if that's what's necessary. Some folks want to get back to work and that's part of the process. And so it's a delicate balance there sometime.
Is there a culture of taking time off like that can be seen? It's hard to take time off from work. You can feel weak.
Yeah.
Essentially. Is there, do you feel the culture supports that?
I hope so. I think that's a good question maybe for Jim, and he'll be up here in just a minute. And I'm not kicking the can, but I think peer support and many of these other resources fall within the Office of Professional Standards and Compliance. And I think he probably has a more accurate answer to that than I do.
Yeah, so quick question. I'm just wondering, in terms of, I guess you would call it external monitoring. I know in our committee, we talked about getting body cameras and it's taken a long time to get to that point. So I'm wondering, there's sort of two sides of this. One is body cameras, like, are they even, I don't think they're being used yet, but we're right on the cusp. Maybe speak to what happens, what's the status of body cameras? And then the other thing is, there are some cameras already in the facility. When you go back and look at those, when you're trying to understand what happened in an event, is there audio? Is it just video? How much detail do you have? Are you actually seeing in each person's cell? Are you just seeing a hall view? Tell me about the external monitoring that's happening within the facility.
Yeah, it's a good question. So body cams are coming. We're not quite there yet. That process, like many state processes, there's technical components, so it has to go through ADS for approval. There's a human resources component. It has to make sure we write policy that enables those to be in place. Also has a labor component, so that had to be bargained, and we had to do collective bargaining over the body cam deployment. So you're right, it's been a very long process. We are close. Al could tell you probably the exact date of deployment, but we are close. I think that's going to be a game changer for us. I think one, it will demonstrate how impressive and mission focused, how much integrity our staff have. I think it's actually more a tool for them than anything, because we hear so often, oh, staff did this, and we don't have great ways of demonstrating that it wasn't true. Body cams will help us to address that. But it also will capture audio, which is a shortcoming of our system. So we do have video in every living unit. It is not each individual cell, and I think there's a variety of reasons for that, but it doesn't have audio. And so that's a limitation that we have in our system right now. The camera system has been historically, for long-term members of HCI, cameras and corrections is always a pain point. We don't actually own that system, and there's state rules about the procurement of camera systems, and so that's always been a challenge. I think the body cams will help to alleviate many of the challenges associated with the living unit cameras as well. And then we have logbooks, and those are largely the monitoring equipment that we have in place.
So it sounds like the cameras really are going to be a huge change, both in terms of holding people accountable and also defending what their actions are on both sides. I think that's going to provide evidence that's going to be clear what happened in situations, right?
Right.
Wayne?
So your existing camera system, is it just antiquated, or are there rules that prohibit sound or anything like that?
No, I think it's a kind of clunky old system.
Antiquated.
Yeah, and we've gone through improvements. Kind of. I mean, to me, it feels much the same, but that's I think maybe a broader conversation for another day, because it implicates some other departments of government that would probably want to weigh in on that.
Oh, sure.
We did the body cams. We did that with money and the appropriations for 2 sessions, 2 years ago, but we did not want to deploy the body cams until there was a policy in place. We were very clear on that. For that, so.
And that work is all done. We just completed the bargaining piece, so we're getting close to the deployment phase.
It's a step by step.
Yes.
So it's bumping up against the time that you're going to have to leave. Do you have anything else that you want to share?
I mean, I would highlight in many ways, the Department of Corrections, I've heard a lot lately about how the department is failing and all these different things that the department needs to do differently, but it doesn't come with any concrete plan. And what I would actually highlight back to everybody is the Department of Corrections is really the only entity in the state who is every day working to improve the situation for these individuals, and for it to constantly be the entity under attack. And I understand why that happens, but I think it's pretty unfair to the staff and for the folks who are really striving to take care of these people. And so I just wanted to flag that because I think it does a disservice to the public service of the staff in the Department of Corrections, but also the department itself. Vermont should be very proud of its Department of Corrections. It's one of the most progressive, forward-leaning departments in the country that takes its justice mandate very seriously. And I think it deserves a little more credit for the work that it does to continuously improve and provide medical care, provide quality of life care, keep people safe, secure, and on the whole does a very nice job. That doesn't mean there aren't areas for improvement. There absolutely are, but we are taking that on and often alone.
So I have a question, John.
Suggestion, do better on PR, work with the media, and let's have some positive news come out of the OC.
We did get some great news out of the mission, vision, and values work we did.
You did.
And I think that speaks directly to some of the work that we're taking on as a system. But no, your point's well taken. And I think that's something that we're working to do a little more of.
It's a department that's very hidden, and then that's why assumptions are made, and on all sides, everywhere. And the department's well hidden from public view. Anything else? Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I have to cut us a
No,
bit short.
that's fine.
You're in good hands with me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner.
Thanks a lot.
So let's transition to Jim Rice. He's going to talk about the academy, the training academy, as well as how that plays into the recruitment of correctional officers and continued training of them after the initial training. And also, I just want to remind, I do have to leave at 2:00. It's nothing against you, Jim, and Chip can carry on. And we are back on the 4th. So welcome, Jim, if you could just identify yourself for the record.
Thank you for having me. My name is Jim Rice. I'm the Director of the Office of Professional Standards and Compliance, Department of Corrections. So would you like me to start? It might make sense if I just start sort of talking through what our recruitment process looks like now.
Yeah.
A little bit of history around about how we got there, and then I can move right into the training process.
That would work. Thank you.
Okay. I've got some notes here, so I'll refer to these. And all of the stuff that I have today, Isaac, you can provide them if you can. There's a little bit of data, but it's not real heavy with that. So currently, our recruitment process looks very different today than it did 2 years ago, and significantly different from that from pre-pandemic. So just before the pandemic hit, we had expanded our office. At the time, it was just referred to as the Human Resource Department within Corrections. Very small unit, and it encompassed the training academy. And right before the pandemic kicked off, we brought on 2 new positions to focus solely on recruitment and retention, trying to address some of the turnover issues we had and really expand our recruitment. During the pandemic, that everything, shifted focus a little bit. So really with Commissioner Baker, he started a bigger investment into what he renamed the Office of Professional Standards and Compliance, which is what we are now. So we grew a little bit in size, our scope expanded a little bit, and we started getting into the background investigation process. So we've always done criminal background checks and a PREA registration check, but we really didn't have a lot going on as far as how we were screening our applicants. So that all started to change, and it brings us to where we are now today. And so with the pandemic, we had some very significant, as you know, issues recruiting staff. And we got to the point where our staffing levels were really dangerously low. So we started doing some things differently. The recruitment folks that we brought on, their first sort of task was figuring out some pain points in some areas where we could make some drastic changes to bring more staff on for our facilities. And one of the immediate areas we recognized was just with the process itself. And so we're state employees, so that all the hiring is done through, the application is done through the Department of Human Resources. We identified that we were losing as much as 50% of our applicants between the time they submitted an application to the time that we would even get their names so that we could do interviews. So we partnered with the Department of Human Resources and started utilizing Indeed more. And basically what we have is a system now where we realize that most folks are learning about jobs from Indeed. It's easy, one-click applications that doesn't work with the state government. So our pilot program that we started really focused on immediacy of applications getting seen by us, the Department of Corrections. So we now, as soon as folks apply, within we get an immediate message from Indeed and we reach out to those folks within one business day. So it's pretty labor intensive, but we have a staff member dedicated at each one of our facilities. But that's one of their primary functions is they get pinged that there's an applicant and they immediately reach out and make that personal connection with them, schedule the interview to bring folks in. When we did that, we saw our applicants go up over 50%. So, and as I think the commissioners probably talked about with our hiring numbers over recent academies, they've gone way up. So it's been the biggest single impact that we've had as far as getting the numbers that we need. At the same time we were doing that, we implemented a new background investigation process. And so I can talk you through that a little bit, but it'll give you a little bit of an understanding of what the applicant applying for a correctional officer position goes through. So as soon as they apply, typically it's through Indeed. Some folks will still go directly to SuccessFactors, the state website. Our recruitment specialists get an immediate notification. They reach out to that person within one business day. They make that contact and they schedule a time for them to come into the facility. Another drawback of the SuccessFactors application with the state is it's not mobile friendly. And we realized that the majority of our applicants were trying to apply on their phones. So we get them scheduled to come in to the facilities in person. We get them right in there. We make the contact. The Department of Human Resources has been great. They have some things they need to do as far as vetting the actual applicants. So we bring folks in, we help them through that longer application process, do interviews, and we launch into a background investigation process. Minimum quals for the Department of Corrections staff, it's fairly low. It's high school equivalency or a diploma or a high school equivalency, must be 18 years of age or older, and you need 2 years of work experience. So that screening process is done by the Department of Human Resources. So they move through that process. There's also some specialized questions that applicants need to go through around criminal convictions. So if they've been sanctioned for a misdemeanor crime within the last 5 years, they would need a commissioner's waiver. Or if they've ever been convicted of a felony, they would need what's called a commissioner's waiver. And that waiver process is initiated right at the time of application. Once folks have their on-site interview, the local hiring managers, if they want to proceed with the candidate, they then initiate what we call the background investigation process. And that includes a form called the personal integrity form. So Isaac will forward this all to you in documents, so you'll actually get to see what it's all about. But that was something very new to us, something that we developed in partnership with the Department of Human Resources. We partnered a little bit with our with our friends at State Police to see what they were doing on their background investigations. We took pieces of that, and it was vetted through our legal, the Department of Human Resources, and then we also partnered with our DEI consultant, Tal Moore, to help us with that. So the personal integrity questionnaire is done, the criminal records checks are all done, and we typically will have the investigation is done very quickly. They're back to the hiring facilities within 5 days. And currently we're at a point where when from the time someone hits apply now on the Indeed website until a job offer happens is 3 weeks. And previous to this whole process, we were looking at a minimum of 6 weeks. So yeah, I think the average right now, we track all the data, it's right at 21 days from the time of application to job offer.
Sure.
Just quickly, how much of that do you think is Indeed and how much of that is kind of what you've all been doing? Like, has Indeed streamlined it that much?
No, so Indeed is where all the applicants were going.
Yeah.
So we've recognized that's where most folks were going to try to use that because you build your profile and
Yeah.
it's very easy. The streamline piece is the Department of Corrections. It's the local folks at the facilities, having that person dedicated to following up, making the human contact, and then us as a department really holding ourselves accountable to pushing that through quickly.
And that, it sounds like that was a very deliberate, we recognize this rings very results-based accountability, turn the curve kind of stuff. I don't know if that's what you're using, but
Yes,
it sounds like a very deliberate,
it is.
we need to do that, those numbers. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And so around the same time, this is how we've seen our numbers go up, and we feel pretty good about that. There's obviously a lot of room for improvement, but that is what has taken us from our hiring numbers being so low to now being, pretty respectable. We're running numbers through our training academy currently that are at a higher level than pre-pandemic. So. Yes.
Is there any collaboration with the Department of Labor? I know, like in the past, they worked with corrections to, Indeed's a bit passive, proactively going after people, going to like veterans associations, because traditionally that was the recruits.
Yeah, Department of Labor has been great partners of ours. We partner with them through a variety of things, recruiting efforts. Also, we were able to get the position of corrections officer in Vermont certified through the Registered Apprentice Program. Veterans can qualify for the post 9/11 GI Bill from going through the academy and our close programs. So yes, we do partner with them. They've been really great as far as featuring us as featured employers, helping us with job fairs. I know they have mailers that go out, listservs that go out where they'll share our jobs as well.
Excellent, thanks.
So,
Oh, sorry, there's another question. Mike.
What's your maximum academy size? You go to Pittsburgh?
what's
No.
that? No,
No,
How were you doing the training?
Lindenville.
When did you go?
We lease space. We don't have a maximum. We've had in the high 50s before, which is about 20 too many for ideal as far as a learning environment,
So,
but we need the staff. So what we've done in cases like that in the past is we've just gotten creative, split classes, find extra space to utilize the training.
so 30 is ideal.
Yeah, it really is. It's 30 is what we think is a great number. It's big enough, so it's efficient. It's a nice number of folks coming in, but it's good for the learner. When you start getting over that, we really start getting concerned about the learning exchange that happens.
so this academy is not connected to the police, the academy in Pittsburgh. This is totally separate, and they don't do their training. The academy. It's totally separate. John, and then Mary, and then I'm
Couple
gonna have to scoot out at 2:00. So
How many hours, how many days is the training?
6 weeks,
6 weeks, 5 days a week?
5 8-hour days.
Second part of the question, unrelated, you work with any of the CTEs in the high schools to at least expose the kids?
Yes, it's actually, it's a great question. We had we had started down that road pre-pandemic a little bit, and it just fell apart because we just didn't have the capacity. But that's one of our current initiatives right now is really building those relationships at the CTEs. Yeah, and so far we've seen some great results. People seem to like it. And we've got a plan where we're actually going in to help integrate some of our material for corrections actually into their program. So it's kind of exciting.
So Mary, then I'm gonna leave and Tristan.
And so after training, how many folks do you acquire from the class? So let's say you have 50 or even 30, how many actually come in as employees?
Oh, okay. So if they graduate the
Right.
academy,
Right,
they all go back to their respective facilities. So one difference with us and maybe some other training programs is they're DOC employees from the date that they accept that job. So we consider them employees, they just don't happen to be trained yet. And so when they come through the program, and if they graduate the program successfully, they go back to their facilities and they have it's currently only a 2-week field training, facility training model. And so they go through their 2 weeks of FTO time. And at the end of that time, the facility will either certify them so they can work as a normal, regular correctional officer, or if there's like a learning need, they may extend that FTO period.
and how is the retention of keeping the folks that you do end up hiring? Because we heard that there were sometimes problems with that.
Yes, so retention is always, for a long time for us been an issue. Before the pandemic, we were gauging our retention for correctional officer staff at the 1-year mark. So we would look a year postgraduate from the academy, what are we at? And it was typically in the 55%. So
A year out. You retain.
a year out,
Okay.
yes. And so currently, I can provide you more numbers, but some of the data I brought today speaks to our, we just graduated in academy a week and a half ago. So these numbers aren't in here because that would skew it. Going back to the graduation date of 9/2/22. So our last 3 academies combined, we're at 80.4% retention for those, which I think when the commissioner talked about some of our retention numbers looking better, that's what he's talking about. So it's a very positive trend. We're only looking, back to, 9/2/22. It's a short sample size, but we're excited to see that because it definitely looks like it's a good trend.
Do you know what it was prior to that? Like what is that? Are we at 8 months? So what would 8 months have been 5 years ago? Retention.
It was
I guess
pretty close to that.
Yeah. Okay.
We know, so this is more anecdotal, but the area we used to really notice that we would lose folks, if they made it through the academy and we lost them in that first year, it was typically in the day 1 to the facility to 6 months.
Okay.
So that's the time we would typically lose them, I'm sorry. So, I'm sorry.
We've heard suggestions from other DOC staff that some people's opinions more could be done to screen folks even before going into the academy.
Mhm.
Basically, you talked about screening criminal background, other sort of basic screening. Do you include in that an interview process just for sort of, is this person's demeanor or skill set suitable for the job?
Yeah. So there is an interview process they go through. The personal integrity questionnaire is a big piece because it really gets into how truthful and forthcoming this person is going to be. The process looks into all their public social media. And so I have heard the narrative that, so all the hiring is done locally. That's another thing I probably skipped out on, is each facility superintendent is responsible for their own hiring. We support them. And so when they choose to hire someone, they're taking all the information that they have, their interviews, and the background investigation that we've prepared. When the background investigation is done, we submit that back to the facility for their decisions. Red flags are highlighted, anything like that. That facility then will make their decision if we're going to extend the offer of employment to this person. I have heard the narrative that the facilities, they just hire everyone that comes through. And I can tell you that it's not accurate. To go back, should there be more done for screening? Could there be more done? I think it's an area we really want to explore, because is there more that we can do? Perhaps, but I think there's, some big questions at play there.
Hey, Jane, can I just
It's a-
quick follow up?
yeah.
Exit interview with people that drop out, sort of exit interviews, or any analysis of, now we see that their demeanor wasn't exactly good fit, and anything can learn from that.
So we are doing exit interviews. That's a new process as well. DHR has always offered exit interviews to state employees when they leave. We now have a process in place where we offer exit interviews to every employee that leaves. Even someone, if they're in the academy and they decide to leave, we still offer them an exit interview to gather that data. We don't typically get a lot of information that says that would support that they weren't like equipped for the job. Typically in those people are leaving, at least what they're reporting in their exit interviews is for issues with supervisors, don't want to work shift work, those sorts of things. And we have that kind of data we can support for you.
We had Wayne and then John. Questions.
Personality screening tools. I know some agencies are, Pennsylvania, and the game commission there, the law enforcement officers, they were using screening tools like that to, maybe not to upfront to eliminate someone, but at least better understand what their limitations or capabilities might be by different characteristics that show up in those screening tools.
Yeah,
That might be useful.
yeah, I agree. It's an area that we've talked about, we want to explore. Gets into a bigger question. There's other folks, partners we would need to bring to the table, DHR. Then you get into the, we would want to make sure that it's the right screening tool as well, and that there's not built-in inequities in that. And that would get outside of like our expertise. We would really want to partner with folks in that.
It's John.
How many 6-week academies do you run a year?
5.
5. What do you do with a green employee while you're waiting for a new academy to start?
Yeah, so I don't know if you've heard the term gap hire, but people will talk about it a little bit. So that's what that is referring to. We used to be really restricted in our hiring. This is going back probably about 5 years plus, where jobs would be posted for a certain period of time. We would fill the jobs, and then we couldn't recruit and hire for those jobs until a certain point in time. So it was a very inefficient way. So we now have what we call it continuous hiring. So we always have the jobs posted. So as soon as someone applies, they immediately go through that application interview process. And so if someone applies and we hire them today, the facilities will bring them into the facility and put them in what we call the GAP program. It doesn't really stand for anything. It literally means the gap between when they were hired and when the next academy starts. So that was another area we identified as a pinch point where people, they couldn't start working until that academy. So a lot of folks couldn't wait. So they would go on and find other employment. So we put them right to work. We bring them in. They can't work as a normal CO, but there's plenty of training that can happen, onboarding, and there's just a lot of work that needs to happen around a correctional facility. So the facilities, the superintendents, and then we've revised it a little bit. They came up with a gap hire protocol. And basically it's a matrix for people. They'll go to training while they're there. So as someone goes through, if they just work for a week or two before the academy, or they might work a full month or more before the academy, they'll get training, they'll get different things that will happen. And depending on where they are in that process, it opens up new doors for what they can do. They'll never work a unit alone by themselves because they're just not trained. But depending on where they're at, that's how we'll utilize them at the facility.
And you team them up with an employee?
Yeah.
So it's almost like an apprenticeship.
Yes, it's very similar. Yeah. When the facilities get all that information back and they make their decision on the hire, I did bring let me see, I think I've got some data here to show you a little bit, or to talk about. So we hear the same thing, that facilities are just hiring every person that applies for them. It's not accurate. I'll give you a few for the 169th. This is going back. One of the most key metrics that we've recognized is background investigations requested. So if our unit gets a background investigation requested, that means we've got the applicant, they've been interviewed in the facility, at least sees enough in them that they want to proceed with. So that's sort of the magic number. We want that number to be really high. So for the 169th Academy, there was 45 background investigations requested. The facilities selected to hire, didn't select to hire 6 of them. So of those backgrounds that went back, facilities said, we are not extending an offer for 6 of those folks. For the 170th, we did 87 background investigations. The facilities didn't select 11 of those. 171st, we did 69. The facilities didn't select 17 of those folks. And for the last academy, those 172nd, there was 65 backgrounds requested and completed, and 11 of those folks, the facilities chose not to hire. So this morning when I was at a meeting at central office, I got 3 emails about people that the facilities are deciding not to hire. So I do think we always have room to grow and improve, and we talk about that a lot. We really want to make sure we're hiring those right people, but that selection process, there is a little bit more there than what a lot of staff see.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then I think the last thing I was going to mention about that was that 80.4% retention rate for those last 3 academies. It's a, it's a good trend. We're hopeful that it'll continue to rise. Probably, I think it says a lot about the work that the facilities are doing on trying to hire the right people, trying to support them the right way when they get back and treating them well.
I've heard a notion that when you put someone, I mean, that makes sense, when you put someone right to work in a facility and they're kept track of, but that the culture of that facility will travel with them. And in spite of the training that may be much more progressive than some of our facilities are, that they go back to that and carry the old ways with them. And then have you experienced something like that? I mean, it's something
Yes.
that's been just kind of floating around the committee here.
Yes, it's real. I think it's much less significant than it used to be.
Yeah.
For a lot of reasons. I mean, our veteran staff have been through a lot over the last few years. And so I think that they certainly recognize the better they welcome and treat folks. And but we've had a lot of staff turnover. So our staff are much more, I would say, junior than they were 5-10 years ago, people with less time in grade. So a lot of that has changed. The culture is shifting. It's going to take time. It's definitely better than it used to be, but yeah, I believe that that's still there. Some of the things that we do, the facility recruitment and retention specialists have played a big role in impacting that for the positive. I personally believe that connections are really important for folks, as wanting to stay with an employer. And so what we've seen at the training academy is with these local recruitment and retention folks, they already have that connection. So they're working in the facilities a little bit. They have someone who's been looking out for them, who's helped them through the process, who's hired them on. They come to the academy. While the academy's in session, the recruitment specialists are there once a week. So if you're a new hire from a facility, you're going to see a familiar face from your leadership team at that facility at least once a week. They're checking in on them, talking with them. Our training staff are meeting with them to make sure that we're on top of issues for folks, just to try to really shift that pendulum to a more supportive culture for them. So I'm sure there's a lot of growth there, but that culture piece is real, and it's definitely something that facilities are working to try to change.
So someone applies to a facility that is in their geographic location, basically, so they can travel back. Well, that's the way it tends to work.
Yes.
Do you have people relocating to go to another facility that may be more desirable, or?
Yes, sometimes it's typically, we used to see it more than we do now. Historically, some facilities just wouldn't have as many openings as others. So somebody might decide, I'll apply for a facility that's further away because I didn't get hired at the one closest to me because they didn't have enough. And facilities have always, at least in my time, been really good at, we would recognize that at training, like you're working a long ways from where you live. Do you want to do that? There's other options. Facilities have historically been really good about accommodating, you know, getting folks to the closer facility. We really haven't seen it as much lately, but it does happen. People, sometimes we get folks that are moving here from that state as well, or they just might not know that there's a facility closer to them than where they've applied. So we look at that, meaning OPSC. Those are all things that we look at when they come in, and we start working on their plan, their training plan and development plan, and try to really recognize some of those barriers. So you might, you know, not lose an employee that you otherwise would have.
Do you have any housing assistance plan for situations like that?
No.
Because it's a real issue.
It's a real issue for us
For
too.
sure.
And we hear it often. We've had folks come to our academy that have been working at a facility for a few weeks, living at a hotel because they're trying to find a place because they're relocating. Our recruitment numbers, I can share a little bit of that with you. I think I have some here that you might find interesting demographically where folks are coming from.
Yeah.
So we can provide this to you as well. You'll
That would
see
be
like
great.
some of the numbers around Indeed when we talk about, are they all coming from Indeed? It just seems to be the platform people know, and that's where they go. That's one of the reasons why we target that. So in the 172nd, we had 28 graduates. It's not right. I apologize. That's not the number of graduates we had. I'll get that for you here in a second. So we had 6 people out of that class relocate from out of state. We had 20 that were Vermonters already living in Vermont. They started working in Vermont. We had 18 that live outside of Vermont and were going to remain living inside of Vermont. So they were living in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
So more folks were not Vermonters than were in that class. The previous academy to that, 171st, we had 9 that relocated from out of state. 19 were Vermonters and they were remaining in Vermont. We had 12 that were living outside of Vermont, commuting to our facilities. It's a trend we've seen, you know, going back a few years that, you know, the recruitment that's happened tells us some of the recruitment that's happening in the state is good, but it also tells us where folks are coming from.
Yeah.
And housing is one of the first things that pops to our mind as a real barrier.
How does Vermont wages compare to New Hampshire, let's say? And I would think New York's probably higher, but
They're comparable. Isaac, you might even have better info than me on that as far as lately. There is a market factor process that's going on. DHR is doing a real comparison right now looking at, but I think they're fairly close is what we're learning, correct?
Yeah, that's a good question. So DHR is doing that market analysis. There's also Department of Labor national data on this. And I believe Vermont's average was number 18 or 20, to kind of depending on whether you're looking at, you know, mean or median, but it was, you know, sort of in that range.
New Hampshire's minimum wage is a lot lower than ours. Half,
I
actually.
think it was $27 and something.
Yeah, 7 something, yeah, 736 or something like that. Do you have a question, John?
Yeah, come back to me. Sorry.
Okay. Any other questions?
Oh,
All right, good. Just in time, John.
a minute for the synapses to reconnect. Your advertising budget, I've seen quite a few of your TV ads. Do you track what's effective and the most effective so you can
Yes.
get those bang for your buck?
Yeah, that's a new world for us, the advertising that you're seeing. I'm guessing this is just a ballpark. We really launched into it about, I would say 9 months ago-ish. The information we were told was going to take about 6 months to really kick in. So maybe it's been about a year. And at that 6-month mark was right around the time when our numbers started going up. So we knew that they were effective, but we have a contract with Gray Media, and part of that is they're producing statistics and data for us monthly on everything that is showing how many impressions we're getting, how many, who's seeing what. So they're providing us with that data that we can then look at and try to really glean, is it worth the money that we're spending on that? So yes.
Nothing else? Everyone's good? Okay, Jim, thanks a lot.
Thank you,
Good to
Jim.
see you again.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. I
Thanks
appreciate
for the
your time.
information. And you're going to send
You almost do away with the academy, or only do 2 a year.
That would be great. Staff would love that. But yeah, yes, I can, I'll make sure Isaac has the materials I was talking about,
Okay,
and we'll get all that stuff to you.
very good.
Sure.
Thanks very much, Jim.
Thank you.
Isaac.
Thank you.
So I think that was it for this afternoon.
So I thought you were calling on Isaac to testify for us. I was like, "Oh, Isaac can talk about it."
Oh, no, oh,
I
no.
understand that.
He has avoided the hot seat all session, I must say.
Because I'm out of here.
Okay,